Well, we're so thankful that you could join us today for our second part in a conversation on race that Terry and I had before. We're so grateful for the feedback and the comments that you all have provided. And our hope in this is not to be the final word, but that we continue to keep a conversation going. And that as this particular event with George Floyd will fade out of the news in coming weeks, that we don't lose the momentum that this event has started, not just in our country, but in particular in our church communities, in this church community. But we realize that many of you don't even live in our area that are watching this today. And so we want to be an encouragement to you as well. And so grateful, Terry, that you and I can spend a few more moments together today. From your perspective, we've been talking about, what has made this particular event with George Floyd different than the many others that have happened, even in the last few years.
Yeah, I think that's key, that we realize that this is not the first, and that I think what sets it apart is the season that we're in. God placed us in a pause for a moment, and so we've had the time to be able to reflect. We've been, as the term has been utilized over and over, socially disconnected, and so we've plugged into our devices and are reading and are seeing things that we may not have ordinarily seen because we were too busy. So it didn't impact us as intimately in the past as it has right now. Now, whether that intimate feeling is a false sense of intimacy or if it truly is a reality, and I think based on the perspective in which you're seeing all of this determines how truly that has impacted you, which will determine whether this has just been a fad or if it's a change.
I mean, one of the things I've been encouraged about that seems different to me is that in all of the protests and things in a variety of cities around our country is that you have more white people showing up in protests, that you have, it seems, more momentum. It isn't just a black protest, but there are whites as well joining in saying we want to be a part of the solution. And I know last time we talked about more than just making a Facebook statement, but what are particular action points that people who want to be a part of the solution and the change can make. And we talked about education and being informed. And yet, on one side, it almost stings when we hear that because it seems like, but I feel educated, am I not educated? Even someone like myself who feels like, born and raised in Montgomery, public school system, I try to be as sensitive as possible, but yet even I've realized how many things I did not know and how ignorant I am on everyday things that are happening. So talk a little bit about being informed.
Yeah, and again, I think it comes from that perspective that I started this conversation out with of is it and has it been a part of your reality all along, or are you now suddenly being awakened to that? And we all want to feel like we're in the know and we're a part of, and whether that comes from entitlement or whether you're actually engaged in whatever it is. But again, we've been on a pause. And so those that have not experienced what has all been going on are now actually seeing. And I'm talking, for my white brothers and sisters that have not been on the front lines before, that they've had a pause in which they are now seeing. And so, and particularly when we talk about millennials that are like, okay, this ain't happening on my watch.
Right. And I see that on just my social media feed, that the millennial generation is really being incredibly vocal, and they're not going to continue to allow things to go on that have been happening. And so we want to join with that. And I think a text that I was reflecting on this week when Jesus was with the disciples at the Last Supper, and he's saying, one of you is going to betray me. All of them were like, not I, not me, not me. And yet, a few verses later, at the cross, they would all scatter. And I think from a white perspective, as we're having these hard conversations, that a lot of us are saying, not me, I'm not racist. I have black friends. But yet, I think we probably are very unaware of a lot of things that either we say that we don't realize are offensive or under the table racist, or perpetuating stereotypes. And so what are some of the things that you hear? Because you have a wide circle in your life. And what are some of the things you hear from time to time from well-intentioned people that really speak showing they're not as informed as they could be?
Yeah. And I think I'll start by saying, let's put some terminology on that, because that is the educational part of it. It's not just me saying what I feel or what I've experienced, because then that could be dismissed as, well, that's just Terry's feelings. But when we talk about microaggressions and what that looks like, and some of that is experience or evidence when if I have a white friend that says, well, Terry, you're not like other black people, or Terry, when I see you, I don't see color. We're just girlfriends together, or or whatever it is. Well, what that says is the latter one is, I'm invisible. You've erased all of this. So then what do you see? Because what I hear you saying is you're looking through me. You don't see the person in front of you. Mm-hmm. And then the whole, well, I'm not like, well, what's your framework of like? Mm-hmm. I mean, what's your experience been other than me? Now, if I'm talking with my friends, other than me, who else has been up close and personal in your life? And for most of them, 90+% of those, it's been, well, I mean, no, I don't. I mean, I don't interact with black people. I go to work, and there may be one or two there, and, I go to church, and it's primarily, and so, they begin unpacking, but there's nobody else. So then I go back to, so then what is your frame of reference from? Right. And so then that becomes hurtful to me. You said it, and they're like, oh no, I didn't mean it. What I was saying was that you're like me. Well, what do you mean I'm like you? Right. And so then they begin to unpack what their reality is for it. So putting some terminology on that, and then processing what are you saying, and what does what you're saying, where does that frame of reference come from? Mm-hmm.
And that happens probably on a frequent, regular, everyday basis. Yeah. And in conversations, and I tried to apply what we talked about last time, and asking my friends of color, how are you processing? What are you going through? And man, the story is just being a listener, that I think many of us do not realize the everyday instances. These are not isolated incidences that you experience on a daily basis, but they're everyday things that are systemic, that most of us are clueless to. And I remember asking for an example, and you said, which one happens every day? And so how can we keep that awareness in front of all of us, so that those of us who are blind to it, who don't see it, who want to see, who want to be a part of the solution, how do we open our eyes?
Yeah, I think when you're, because we had, talked about in our last conversation about, your tribe, your circles of people. So having those conversations within your tribe of people. So when you guys are getting together to barbecue, or, swim at your pool or whatever, and, what are conversations you're having? When you say, or when you hear, Someone say, well, I'm afraid of a black man, or when I say I don't see color, or when I say that, you're not like others. What are you saying, and why do you think that's okay to say that? Where does that frame of reference come from? And then having an honest and open conversation about it. And then checking yourself about, well, how do I feel? I mean, what was I meaning? Why was I feeling that was okay for me to say that? So I think it starts there with doing the thing that we're doing right here, of having the conversation about where do those phrases come from. Because again, like I said, when I hear things like that, I hear insults, I hear assaults on me as a person. That's part of my identity. So you've invalidated or stripped that away.
Yeah. And yet in the gospel, in the New Testament, in all of Scripture, we see a celebration of that diversity in the picture of Revelation, where there'll be people from every tribe, every tongue, under heaven, gathered at the throne. And for us as believers, working towards that reality now, not waiting for it to be true just in heaven, but displaying it now. And that's why I think as a church, I want to keep this issue in front of us and not lose the opportunity, because I think we have this amazing opportunity to get to the next level, to continue to make progress. And I think what you were speaking there to is not being complicit in the silence, because I've heard from many of my friends like, well, I don't want to start anything, I don't want to stir anything up. And so we sit back and we're silent when somebody says something that really needs to be called out. And it's really developing courage and a boldness that I think is of God, because Jesus was not afraid to call out hypocrisy and stand up for people that were other than what he was, right? And so I think looking to Jesus as the model there, we've got to continue to pursue that.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly that in our mind, particularly, and I can only speak from a Western culture, but I see how we give categories of weight, if you will, to sin. And so whereas saying, that, we're okay with abortion or whatever it is, it's like, oh my goodness. But yet it's okay to denigrate, to oppress another brother or sister, and we don't see where that equates with killing. But what are you doing? You may not have been the one to actually put a knife to their throat or end this specific life, but you're slowly doing that to this, and they are one and the same. One and the same. But we're very good at, it's okay to, take those things of paper clips, but, stealing money from a company or whatever.
Yeah. One of the things that pieces of feedback I got from our first conversation was, people will say, again, I'm not racist, or I don't think I'm racist, I don't feel racist, but if I really do an examination of my actions, I'm not modeling anything different in terms of being inclusive and who I spend time with and listening to other people. And so the barrier from what I feel I am versus what I do, what I say I am versus my actions that are observable and measurable. So what are some of the indicators that you'd say, like, these are some actions that would say where we're at and who we really are?
Yeah. And I think, if I, flip it back to you in terms of some of the things that you have tried to be actionable about in making a difference in having people of color in your life. And so I know when you have the question to others about who's in your life, who's speaking into your life. And again, if everyone is speaking the same thing that you're speaking, and I think you've tried to in earnest do that. Is there room for improvement? Yeah, there's room for improvement with everybody. And so, and I think when we begin to take offense that somebody questions where you are on that spectrum of learning, then you probably need to check yourself, because you've said that I know everything I need to know about this, and how dare you question what I know. Well, that's a sense of arrogance, if you will. And so, and I have to do that for me, of always learning and seeing, because I need to grow just like you do. So
Absolutely.
I think it's just a sense of arrogance to think that I know everything that that there is to know. How could you?
Especially as a Christian,
Yeah.
right? Because we've all said we got sin in our hearts we don't even know about until the Holy Spirit reveals it to us. And so I think asking as a believer to say, Holy Spirit, reveal to me, speak to me ways that I am contributing and to the problem, things that secret sin in my heart, right? That's Psalm 51, and bring it out and deal with it in my life,
Yeah.
God. Don't let it be
Yeah,
the same.
because how can you say, okay, how can you blanketly make the statement, I'm not a racist, I'm not a part of racism, and you never ask yourself the questions about our history. You never ask yourself the question within your own day-to-day life about, the things that you have been afforded, the places that you go. I was having a conversation with a friend, and she was saying, I never thought about the fact that you have to have a conversation with your children, not just my son, but daughter as well, about when they go out and the things that they have to be concerned about. I never even thought about that. But all this time, I've called myself your friend. And even as that friend, some of the comments that she would make, because she was one of the ones that had said to me that, you're,
Right.
yeah, you're one of us. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
And so,
Well-intentioned, but highly offensive at the same time.
but she didn't see that at all.
Right. Mhm.
So having those conversations and really checking ourselves.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that point, because for many of us that might say, I'm not a racist, I have black friends, have found themselves in the last couple of weeks listening to stories that they had no clue their black friends went through. That they were, for whatever reason, and maybe you might speak to that, is why those of us who say, well, I have black friends, but had no clue some of the daily things that they experienced and went through. Is it, I don't want to call attention to it? Is it, I'm embarrassed by it? Is it, I want to keep the peace? What are some of the reasons that maybe those things have not been spoken of more? Or maybe they have and we just haven't heard them, so.
For me, you and I have had conversations about this. I have a problem with the word friend, because everybody that we call friend is not really our friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that from the standpoint of, you call me friend, but you don't really know me.
Yeah.
Nor have you tried to get to know me. Because if you had, you would have already known that this was an issue for me. So when I hurt, you hurt.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm going through an issue, you know it, because you are my friend.
Mm-hmm.
We have a whole lot of acquaintances, but we don't have a whole lot of friends. Friend is somebody that you have in and out of your home. Friend is somebody that you can talk with and be real and call each other on the carpet about when things are said or when things are done or not done. that's a friend. So I think the problem starts there with everybody running around talking about, well, I got a black friend, I got a friend, I got a friend of color. That's not really your friend. They're your acquaintance. They may live in your neighborhood. They may be at your job, but they're not your friend.
Yeah.
So it's getting to know someone. It's like we said in our first conversation, asking, hey man, how's it going? How are you processing?
Yeah.
Really being invested and concerned and interested. That's why, in this, and I know I digress for a second, but this speaks to the way that we do things. How often do we ask somebody, about a problem that's going on in their life, and we're quick to say, I'll pray for you, knowing doggone well as soon as you walk past them, the thought is gone, because you're not invested in them. And so in the moment, that's the right thing to say, but you're not really invested in that individual's life enough to do it. So don't say, whether you're calling that person a friend or saying you're going to pray for them or saying you're concerned about it, don't speak it unless you mean it.
Yeah, that's so good. Let's talk about the next generation. We can obviously look back to the previous generations, and we have museums dedicated to the work and the legacy that have brought us forward. But obviously we have a long way to go. And as you and I have been talking about kind of the next generation, we both are parents, that your kids are a little bit older, they're adults, and they're successful in their careers, and mine are on the younger spectrum. And so how do we parent through adult children and kids that are in high school and elementary age to continue the progress?
Yeah. It sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, but it's about being honest with ourselves as parents about what our experience has been, what our history has been, whether, from a white perspective, whether, your parents or your grandparents were slave owners, or how involved they may have been in the process, then having that open and honest conversation about, okay, this is part of our heritage. This is what, this country was founded on, and what all of that means. And I think until we begin to educate our kids, because pretending that it was just a story, that it's something that they just read out of a book, that happened, may or may not have happened, hundreds of years ago, is that's a huge part of the problem, that we are not educating our kids. For us, it's like sitting around a table on Sundays, or a Monday or a Wednesday or a Thursday. It's just part of who we are and what our experience has been as Black people. Our kids, when they were younger, I had them interview their grandparents. I want to sit down, ask them these questions so that you can know from their experience what it was like during these times. And so they know it, and they take pride in knowing who their grandparents are and the strong men and women that their grandparents are. And so now that's a part of who they are. And so that's why their voices are strong about helping, and that's why they have been broadened and awakened in terms of what their circle of influence looks like, because they are not afraid to speak up, and so they are not fearful. You're fearful of what you don't know. And so by not having those conversations with your children, you perpetuate that. And then it becomes going back to those microaggressions, of those little assaults of, I'm afraid of a Black man, because you've not been taught and you've not had that conversation. It's just something that's been silently ingrained in you, that somehow, somewhere, I'm supposed to fear this thing.
And that starts at an early
Very
age.
early age.
And I know as a parent, and I probably missed some opportunities, probably many opportunities, as my kids were super small, even the bedtime story books that we read, what kind of diversity is in.
You mean the lack of diversity?
The lack of diversity
Yeah.
in our bedtime story books and the messages that we're giving. Even the pictures of Jesus that are always white. And so we're breeding things that we don't even realize in the moment. Again, lack of understanding.
Yeah, because
and
when
being
you
informed.
when you talk about the psychology of, and I'm not a psychologist by any certain stretch of the imagination, but understanding thought process and thought patterns. I've done research on the brain and in terms of how we what our thought process is like, in that, in the course of a day, the thought processes that we hold on to, and we hold on to those, and we play that cycle over and over and over again, and we live out of that thought process. So if you're talking about, raising a child, they're listening, they're seeing, and so what the parents say, what the parents listen to, all of that is beginning to formulate thoughts. And so whether the parents out and out said that we hate black people, they're inferior, your actions and your thoughts and what you allow to be spoken in and around your home and those around you, the lack of people of color in your life, all of those things are formulating thoughts for that individual. So then years later, when they go to a work environment, or they're wherever they are, and now there's diversity in that, oh, this is not a part of my thought process.
Right.
So I don't know anything about this. It's strange. I'm frightened.
And I hope with my own kids, just using common resources, some of the great movies that have come out in recent years that tell some of the stories, having processing with our kids, letting them watch some things that are age appropriate and having those conversations. What do you think about that? Does that surprise you? What do you take away? What do we need to learn? What lessons do we not need to repeat?
And
again?
I think also it's important that you as the parent are in the right frame of mind to have that conversation with them, because yet again, if you're not ready to have the conversation with them, then it becomes, well, that was a movie. So you're minimalizing what the actual experience was, or the truth of the matter, the underlying, the foundation of it. So I think we as parents need to be okay with having real conversations.
Yeah, and there's something about that could be scary for a lot of people, right? Because either A, they don't know how to, or past hurts or experiences, but we can't as believers walk in fear, right? We've got to be people of faith and ask the Spirit of God to guide us and to convict us and help us move forward and make progress.
And do you think part of that is because we like to compartmentalize things? Do you think that part of it, and I'm asking for you as a white man, is it that we are okay with compartmentalizing our Christian walk between what happened years ago and what because we're saying that it happened years ago, or how do you mesh together being a Christian and what that says who we are, with that this doesn't exist, or
I think there is a compartmentalization, because I think it's very tempting to see this as a social issue and not necessarily a Christian issue. I mean, it is, but maybe sometimes we've segmented that, like, well, we're, our laws and equality and all of this, but really as a people of God, taking it up as a mantle and saying that, if we're going to be like Jesus, then we can't ignore. We can't not have the conversation. We can't not be an advocate for justice. We can't sit silent And, I'm probably very guilty at times of being silent. When somebody said something that was off color that should have been called out and addressed, and for whatever reason, being afraid. And that's why I'm praying for the courage as a Jesus follower to not continue to be silent. And so that's why I appreciate the perspective, that we've been able to have in conversation, because you've helped me be better and be a better learner and be a better student. And I want to continue to grow in that. So I know we're about to wrap up. Any final thoughts from today?
I think it again goes back to us kind of reevaluating who our circles are, and then being okay with having those conversations in our circle. Again, continuing to be learners of it. We all have room. I mean, Jesus was a perpetual learner. What did he do? He sat and he listened. He sat and he listened. He would take journeys all over the place just so he could hear people's stories, and so he could be able to speak into their story.
In Ephesians 2, Jesus breaks down the dividing wall of hostility between, the context at that time was Jew and Gentile.
Yeah.
But, isn't it true when we see people as the other over there rather than we're one, we're family? And I think, as believers, seeing a unity, a togetherness, brother and sister, and not as those people over there that are different. Jesus broke down that wall, and we've got to continue to believe and live in that way. So
Yeah, I agree.
I'm grateful for the conversation, and thanks. Let's keep it going.
All right.
All right. Thanks for joining us today.